Most people don't get defeated by life itself. They get defeated by what they decide a setback means. The moment something goes wrong, the mind rushes in and labels it as failure, as loss, as proof that maybe I'm not good enough. But that is the first illusion that needs to break if you ever want real strength. A setback is never just an ending. It is information. It is feedback. It is life interrupting your current direction because the path you are on is either incomplete, misaligned, or not strong enough to carry the person you are becoming. The problem is not the setback. The problem is the meaning you attach to it. Think about it clearly. Every person you admire, every story of success you've ever heard has passed through moments that look like collapse from the outside. Plans failed, doors closed, people walked away, money disappeared, opportunities were lost. But the ones who eventually rose to a different level did not treat those moments as identity. They treated them as instruction. Strength is not built in comfort. Strength is built in resistance. You don't discover who you are when everything is easy. You discover who you are when life applies pressure and you are forced to respond. And in that moment, you either shrink back into fear or you step forward into awareness. There is a pattern that separates those who grow from those who stay stuck. Most people react emotionally first and think later. But those who turn setbacks into strength do the opposite. They pause, they assess, and they ask a different kind of question. Not, why is this happening to me? But what is this trying to develop in me? That one shift changes everything because now the focus is no longer on blame. It is on growth, and growth always creates power. A setback exposes gaps. It shows you what was missing in your preparation, your mindset, your skills, or your discipline. That exposure is not punishment. It is a gift most people never recognize because without awareness of a gap, there can be no improvement. And without improvement, there is no evolution. But awareness alone is not enough. Many people see what went wrong and still stay stuck. Why? Because they confuse awareness with identity. They say, I failed, instead of saying, that approach failed. One statement traps you, the other frees you. You are not your mistake. You are the observer of it, the learner from it, and the one who decides what happens next. Real strength begins when emotion is no longer the driver of your decisions. It does not mean you stop feeling disappointment or frustration. It means you refuse to let those emotions define your next move, because emotions are temporary signals, not permanent truths. There is a powerful moment that comes after every setback. It is the moment of choice. Most people don't even recognize it. They slip into habits, complaining, withdrawing, blaming, escaping. But a different path exists. In that same moment, you can choose discipline over emotion, curiosity over judgment, action over paralysis. And that choice, repeated over time, is what builds an unshakable person. Setbacks also reveal something deeper, what you are attached to. Sometimes you are not upset about the failure itself. You are upset because an expectation about your identity was disrupted. You thought you were ahead. You thought you were secure. You thought things should have gone differently. But growth does not care about your expectations. It cares about your development. And development often requires disruption. If everything always worked the first time, you would never develop resilience. You would never develop patience. You would never develop the mental toughness that allows you to hold steady when life becomes uncertain. So in a strange way, setbacks are not blocking your path. They are building your capacity to walk it. There is another truth. Most people overlook pressure, reveals potential. You don't know how strong you are until being strong is the only option left. And in that space, something surprising happens. You begin to access parts of yourself that were dormant. Creativity shows up, discipline shows up, courage shows up, not because life became easier, but because quitting stops being an option you entertained. This is where transformation begins, not when conditions improve, but when your standard for yourself rises above conditions. You stop negotiating with discomfort. You stop waiting for motivation. You stop requiring perfect timing. Instead, you start building momentum through action, even when it is small, because momentum is what breaks the emotional weight of setbacks. Action dissolves hesitation, movement dissolves fear, and over time, something powerful happens. What once felt like a breakdown becomes the foundation of a new level of identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who gets knocked down. You start seeing yourself as someone who adapts, adjusts, and advances. That shift is everything, because life will continue to test you, not to break you, but to confirm whether you are still committed to becoming more than your current circumstances. And each time you respond with clarity instead of collapse, you strengthen that identity. Setbacks are not proof that you are moving backward. They are often proof that you have reached a level where new resistance is required for your next evolution. And if you can learn to interpret them correctly, you stop fearing them. You start using them. And once that happens, nothing in your past has the power to define your future anymore. Most people instinctively interpret setbacks as a signal that something is wrong with them or their path. The moment things don't go as expected, the mind rushes to label the experience as failure. That label feels final, almost like a verdict on ability, intelligence, or potential. But that interpretation is where the real struggle begins, not the setback itself. Because once a setback is defined as failure, it stops being useful information and starts becoming emotional weight. Reframing a setback begins with understanding that life does not communicate in praise or punishment. It communicates in feedback. Every result you get is a form of data about what worked, what didn't work, and what needs to change. When something doesn't go the way you planned, it is not life rejecting you. It is life revealing to you the gap between your intention and your current strategy. That gap is not a weakness in your identity. It is a space for refinement. Think of any skill you have ever learned, whether it was walking, speaking, driving, or even something complex like building a career or business. None of it happened without correction. You did not succeed on the first attempt. You adjusted. You tried again. You improved based on what didn't work. In those early stages, failure wasn't emotional, it was educational. You didn't take every mistake as a personal flaw. You took it as a necessary part of learning. But somewhere along the way, especially in adulthood, people begin to attach emotion and identity to outcomes. A missed opportunity becomes, I am not good enough. A rejection becomes, I am not capable. A mistake becomes, I am a failure. This shift is subtle but powerful because it transforms neutral events into personal judgments. And once something becomes personal, it becomes heavier to carry and harder to learn from. Reframing setbacks as feedback requires breaking that emotional attachment. It means training the mind to pause before reacting and asking a different question. What does this result actually tell me? Not what does it say about me as a person, but what does it reveal about my approach, my timing, my preparation, or my understanding? That simple shift moves you out of judgment and into analysis. When you treat a setback as feedback, you regain control. You stop seeing yourself as someone being judged by circumstances and start seeing yourself as someone gathering information from experience. This creates emotional distance, and that distance is powerful. It allows clarity to return where confusion used to be. Instead of spiraling into self-doubt, you begin to observe patterns. Instead of collapsing under disappointment, you begin to study the situation. This mindset also builds resilience over time. Because feedback is never permanent. It is always adjustable. If something didn't work, it simply means a different approach is required. That mindset removes the fear of trying again. When failure is no longer final, action becomes easier. You are no longer protecting your ego. You are improving your method. And the more consistently you apply this interpretation, the more your entire experience of setbacks changes. What once felt like defeat begins to feel like direction. What once felt like rejection begins to feel like redirection. You start to understand that progress is not a straight line, but a process of correction and refinement. And in that process, every setback becomes part of the path forward rather than an obstacle on it. Most people assume that strength is built in moments of success, but real strength is formed in resistance. Comfort never asks anything meaningful from you. When life is smooth, predictable, and easy, there is no demand for adaptation. You operate within what you already know, what already feels safe, and what already works. But growth does not live in that space. Growth begins the moment you are pushed beyond familiarity and forced to deal with something you have not yet mastered. Resistance is not punishment. It is the environment in which capability is developed. Think about how physical strength is built. Muscles do not grow when they are at rest. They grow when they are under strain, when they are challenged beyond their current capacity, when small tears in the muscle fibers are repaired and rebuilt stronger than before. The same principle applies to mindset, discipline, and emotional resilience. Without pressure, there is no adaptation. Without adaptation, there is no evolution. When people experience setbacks, their natural instinct is to avoid discomfort. They want to return to what feels easy, predictable, and safe. But that instinct, while understandable, often keeps them trapped at the same level because everything meaningful you want in life requires you to pass through resistance. New skills, higher goals, better opportunities, and stronger identity all sit on the other side of discomfort. If you avoid resistance, you avoid growth. The challenge is that resistance does not feel encouraging in the moment. It feels frustrating, slow, and often unfair. You put in effort and don't immediately see results. You try again and face rejection. You attempt something new and struggle with it. This is the stage where most people misinterpret the process. They assume difficulty means they are not meant for it, when in reality, difficulty simply means they are in the building phase. Strength is not something you discover in yourself fully formed. It is something you construct through repeated exposure to challenge. Each setback adds a layer of experience. Each obstacle forces a new adjustment. Each difficulty stretches your tolerance for uncertainty. Over time, what once felt overwhelming begins to feel manageable, not because the situation changed, but because you changed through repeated resistance. There is also a hidden benefit to resistance that most people overlook. It reveals capacity you did not know you had. In easy conditions, you only use a fraction of your potential, but when pressure increases, you are forced to access deeper levels of focus, patience, and creativity. You begin to solve problems differently. You start thinking beyond your usual patterns. You develop emotional control in situations that previously would have overwhelmed you. This is why setbacks are often the exact conditions required for transformation. They strip away comfort and force engagement. They interrupt routine thinking and demand new approaches. They remove illusions of control and replace them with awareness of reality. And in that space, real strength begins to form. But to benefit from resistance, you must stop interpreting it as something to escape. Instead, it must be seen as training, not random struggle, but purposeful development. Every challenge becomes a rep. Every difficulty becomes a set. Every setback becomes part of a larger process of strengthening your mental and emotional structure. Over time, something changes in your relationship with discomfort. It no longer signals danger or defeat. It signals growth and progress. You stop measuring success by how easy things feel and start measuring it by how much you can handle without losing direction. And in that shift, resistance stops being your enemy and becomes the very thing that builds you into someone stronger than your former limits. Most people live trapped inside a question that weakens them before they even begin to find answers. That question is, why is this happening to me? It feels natural, even logical, but it quietly pulls the mind into a state of frustration, blame, and helplessness. It shifts attention outward towards circumstances, people, or timing, and away from personal control. The problem with this question is not that it is emotional, but that it is unproductive. It rarely leads to clarity and almost never leads to power. There is a different kind of question that changes everything. It does not deny difficulty, and it does not pretend setbacks are easy. Instead, it redirects focus from suffering to growth. What is this trying to teach me? This question does something powerful to the mind. It transforms the experience from something happening against you into something happening for your development. The situation itself may not change immediately, but your relationship with it changes completely. When you ask, why me? Your mind searches for reasons that reinforce victim thinking. It begins to scan for unfairness, for external blame, for proof that things are not as they should be. That mental search creates emotional heaviness. It keeps you locked in the past moment of disruption, replaying it, resisting it, and emotionally reacting to it. You become focused on the problem instead of the path forward. But when you ask, what is this trying to teach me? The mind shifts direction. It begins to analyze instead of accuse. It starts looking for patterns, lessons, gaps, and opportunities for adjustment. This is no longer emotional spiraling. This is conscious learning. Even if the situation is painful or disappointing, the brain is now engaged in solving rather than suffering. That shift alone reduces emotional intensity and increases clarity. This question also restores a sense of agency. Instead of feeling like life is happening to you, you begin to feel like you are participating in your own development. Even if you cannot control the event, you can control the meaning you extract from it. That sense of control is essential for resilience. Without it, setbacks feel like dead ends. With it, they become stepping stones. There is also a deeper layer to this shift. Every setback carries hidden information about readiness. Sometimes it reveals a lack of preparation. Sometimes it reveals misaligned expectations. Sometimes it reveals emotional reactions that need strengthening. Sometimes it reveals skills that still need development, but none of this information becomes useful until you are willing to ask the right question. Without curiosity, the lesson remains invisible. People who repeatedly grow through setbacks are not necessarily the ones who experience fewer failures. They are the ones who consistently extract meaning from them. They treat each difficulty as a form of feedback from life, not as a judgment of their worth. This allows them to evolve faster because they are constantly updating their understanding based on experience rather than resisting it. The shift from why me to what can I learn also breaks emotional stagnation. Instead of staying stuck in disappointment, the mind is redirected toward progress. Even small insights begin to matter. A mistake becomes a correction point. A delay becomes a timing lesson. A rejection becomes a signal to improve approach or alignment. Over time, this builds a mindset that does not waste setbacks, but converts them into development. And as this habit strengthens, something important happens internally. You stop fearing difficulty because you trust your ability to grow from it. Setbacks no longer feel like interruptions to your life. They feel like part of your training process. The question you ask determines whether you remain stuck in the experience or rise through it. One of the deepest reasons people struggle to move forward after setbacks is because they unconsciously fuse their identity with their outcomes. something goes wrong, and instead of seeing it as an isolated event, they turn it into a statement about who they are. A failed attempt becomes, I am a failure. A rejection becomes, I am not good enough. A mistake becomes, this proves I don't have what it takes. Once identity gets attached to outcomes, every setback becomes heavier than it actually is. But outcomes are not identity. They are temporary results created by specific actions under specific conditions at a specific time. When you confuse the two, you trap yourself in a false narrative where one moment defines the whole person. In reality, a single result is never the full picture. It is only a snapshot of performance in that moment, influenced by knowledge, preparation, mindset, timing, and countless external factors. Separating identity from mistakes begins with recognizing this distinction clearly. You are not the action you took. You are the one who took the action. That difference may seem small, but it changes everything, because the moment you identify as the mistake, you stop seeing the possibility of change. But when you see the mistake as something you did, you immediately open the door to doing something different next time. People who grow quickly in life share this ability to detach identity from outcomes. They can fail without internal collapse. They can lose without losing themselves. They can make mistakes without turning those mistakes into self-definition. This does not mean they are emotionally disconnected or indifferent. It means they are mentally structured enough to understand that growth requires experimentation, and experimentation naturally involves errors. When identity is not tied to outcomes, feedback becomes easier to receive. Criticism does not feel like a personal attack. Failure does not feel like a personal verdict. Rejection does not feel like personal worth being measured. Instead, all of these become information points that help refine strategy and improve direction. This emotional distance is not coldness, it is clarity. The opposite approach, where identity is fused with outcomes, creates fear-based living. People avoid trying new things because failure feels too personal. They avoid risk because mistakes feel too defining. They stay within safe limits because anything outside comfort feels like a threat to their self-image. Over time, this limits potential far more than any external obstacle ever could. Detaching identity from mistakes also allows faster recovery. When you believe a failure defines you, recovery feels like rebuilding your entire sense of self. But when you understand that only the approach failed, recovery becomes simple adjustment. You do not need to rebuild yourself. You only need to revise your method. That difference dramatically increases resilience. There is also an important emotional shift that happens when identity is separated from outcomes. Shame loses its power. Shame thrives when people believe their mistakes reflect their worth. But when mistakes are seen as part of learning, shame transforms into awareness. Instead of hiding from failure, you begin to study it. Instead of suppressing it, you use it. Over time, this creates a stronger internal foundation. You begin to trust yourself, not because you never fail, but because you know failure will not break your sense of identity. You become someone who can move through challenges without internal collapse. And that stability becomes the foundation for taking bigger risks, pursuing bigger goals, and stepping into situations where growth is required. When identity is no longer at stake with every outcome, life becomes less about defending who you are and more about discovering who you can become. Most people already know what they should do in difficult situations, but they don't do it because emotion takes control before discipline has a chance to respond. In the moment of pressure, disappointment, or setback, the emotional brain speaks louder than the rational mind. It pushes toward avoidance, comfort, distraction, or blame. And if there is no trained discipline in place, that emotional wave becomes the default driver of behavior. Choosing disciplined action over emotional reaction is not about suppressing emotion. It is about refusing to let emotion make long-term decisions for you. Emotions are real, but they are not reliable guides for direction. They are signals, not strategies. They tell you how you feel, but they do not tell you what will move your life forward. The difference between those who grow and those who stay stuck is not the absence of emotion. It is the ability to act despite it. In the aftermath of a setback, emotional reaction is usually immediate. There is frustration, disappointment, confusion, sometimes even anger. The mind looks for relief, not progress. It wants to escape discomfort as quickly as possible. This is where most people lose momentum. They stop taking action. They delay decisions. They retreat into habits that numb the discomfort rather than addressing the situation. Disciplined action works differently. It begins with a simple principle. Do what is necessary, not what feels comfortable. This does not require motivation. It requires clarity. Even if the next step is small, even if it is not emotionally satisfying, it is still taken. Because discipline is not about intensity. It is about consistency in the presence of resistance. When someone learns to act without waiting for emotional alignment, something powerful begins to shift internally. The feeling of being controlled by circumstances starts to weaken. Instead of reacting to setbacks, they begin responding to them. Reaction is automatic and emotional. Response is conscious and intentional. That difference creates space for better decisions. There is also a compounding effect to disciplined action. Each time you choose action over emotional withdrawal, you reinforce a pattern in your nervous system. You begin teaching your mind that discomfort does not stop progress. Over time, this reduces the intensity of emotional resistance. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable, not because the situation changed, but because your capacity to act through discomfort increased. Most people underestimate how much their life is shaped by small emotional decisions made in difficult moments. Skipping one important task because of frustration, delaying one conversation because of fear, avoiding one opportunity because of doubt. Individually, these seem small, but over time, they create a pattern of stagnation. Disciplined action breaks that pattern by refusing to let emotion interrupt progress. There's also a deeper identity shift that happens when action becomes independent of emotion. You stop seeing yourself as someone who needs to feel ready before moving. Instead, you become someone who moves and lets readiness develop through movement. Confidence no longer comes before action, it comes from action. Clarity no longer precedes effort, it follows it. Setbacks test this principle more than anything else, because in setbacks, emotional intensity is higher and motivation is lower. This is precisely why disciplined action matters most in those moments. It prevents temporary emotional states from creating long-term consequences. It ensures that progress continues even when feelings are unstable. Over time, this builds a form of internal stability that is not dependent on external conditions. Life can fluctuate, emotions can shift, and circumstances can change, but action remains consistent. And that consistency becomes the bridge between where you are and where you are capable of going. Everything in life eventually comes down to this simple truth: that setbacks are not the end of your story. They are the moment your story is being rewritten. What looks like disruption is often direction in disguise. What feels like loss is often preparation for a stronger version of you that cannot be built in comfort, certainty, or ease. If you learn to see setbacks as feedback, you stop fearing them. If you understand that strength is built in resistance, you stop avoiding challenge. If you shift your questions from blame to learning, you unlock growth. If you separate who you are from what happens to you, you protect your identity from collapse. If you choose disciplined action over emotional reaction, you stay in motion even when everything inside you wants to stop. At a certain point, life stops being about what happens to you and becomes about what you consistently do with what happens to you. That is where transformation lies, not in perfect conditions, but in imperfect moments handled with clarity, not in avoiding failure, but in learning how to move through it without losing direction. And over time, those moments stack: one decision to act instead of react, one decision to learn instead of blame, one decision to continue instead of quit. Slowly, quietly, they build a version of you that is no longer shaped by setbacks, but strengthened by them.